Yes, everybody, welcome back to another daily drop brought to you by TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner. Joining me as he always does, you guys know who he is, it's our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we did earlier, we put out a podcast on the top 5 UNC football teams, the best UNC football teams that you've covered. And now we're switching over to the basketball side. And today we're going to be discussing the top 5 best UNC basketball teams that you've covered throughout your career. So AJ, let's dive right into this one as we always like to do with these drops. Let's start with number 5. Give me your 5th best team on the list for the best teams you covered at Carolina.
2017, the last national championship team.
Good place to start.
That's how good the list is, right?
Yeah, man, that's what a 5 right there, right?
It's interesting because I've covered the 2 losingest teams in Carolina history in the 8-20 club in 2002.
Me too.
14 and 19.
Well, I didn't cover the 2002 team, but I did cover the other one. So
yeah, and I also covered teams that didn't make the tournament, like 2010 and this past season, 2003. So that's 5 teams that didn't make the tournament, which is pretty wild given the history of the program. But the 5th best team that I have covered at Carolina is one that won a national title, the Redemption Crew. That was such a sound team. Someone actually once said to me, they said, 2017 reminded me of 1993, and it was like the perfect Dean Smith team, only it was Roy Williams' team. I said, well, there is a significant connection there. And I think that connection, I think that's kind of a fair comparison because there weren't really any NBA stars on either one of those 2 teams, but they got it done collectively. They had great chemistry. The verve of that team was off the charts. They were tough. That was one of the toughest Carolina teams. And it began with Joel. Joel was so tough at the point. I'll never forget the NCAA run where the big story was the work that Joel was getting on his ankle. And they had those suction things, those marks all around his ankle and stuff that we'd go in and see after a game or in the in-between day, the day before games, the NCAA tournament, when you have access to the locker room and you can go in there and talk to players and stuff. Joel's got that crap all over his ankles. And it's just one question about the ankle after another. He toughed it out. He won the MOP. That was the year that Luke had the shot to beat Kentucky in Memphis. He attempted that thing about 20 feet in front of me. And you talk about loud arenas. When that thing went through, that was pretty wild how loud the Carolina contingent got. And really, that was just a very good team. Kennedy Meeks' performance in the semifinals were amazing. The way Isaiah Hicks went from playing so poorly in the semifinals against Oregon to the way he played in the national title game, another awesome part of the storyline. Justin Jackson, ACC Player of the Year, the quietest ACC Player of the Year that Carolina's had. But, man, he was just so efficient that year. They were a smart team. They were a mature team. They knew what they were all about. And rarely do teams go on redemption tours and actually get the job done. And that team did. They had Nate Britt as their backup point guard. That tells you right there how solid that group was. Nate could have started a lot of places, but he was a backup. He embraced the role. And it's just a fun team, a fun group, a good group, the club that the year before, if you're in that locker room and you see the emotion, and then you're in the locker room a year later, I've told you about this, Jake, a bunch of times when we've just kind of talked about stuff. That to me is one of the most fascinating year-to-year connections that I've dealt with in my career was just the outpouring of sadness and emotion in 2016, letting Kennedy and Bryce Johnson have their time to be emotional with each other. And then the next year asking Kennedy about that. Yeah. And the players saying, we won this for Marcus. We won this for Bryce. We won this for Joel James as well. I thought there's just so many great storylines, such a fun, memorable team. And in the media, I don't root, but I was very happy for that group that they won the title. And I was also happy for Roy, because I remember a moment with Roy outside the locker room in 2016, and he had coached his ass off, got that team to that point. And the way they lost was almost criminal, but it's also beautiful in a lot of ways, because I think those kids got everything that they could have gotten out of that experience, and it paid off the next year. So I also, one last thing on Roy very quickly. Also, this was his title after Dean had passed. I thought that this was the moment where where Roy became totally 1,000% secure in himself. I'm not saying he wasn't secure previously. I don't mean it to come across that way, but this was sort of like the gravitas title.
Yeah.
Because he had become the patriarch of North Carolina basketball. And he was under Dean's shadow. And I think we'll do another daily drop about comparing Dean and Roy for the fun of it. But I honestly think you can make a cogent argument that Roy was at Dean's level, or maybe better, because I think that he was such a good postseason coach. And that 2016 to 2017 is a great example. That's incredibly high-level coaching. Incredibly high-level coaching for any sport at any level, at any period in history, what Roy did during that sequence. And I was happy for him too, because he wasn't as respected as he should have been. I think part of it because of the Dean Shadow thing. That title nudged him toward the Mount Rushmore of college basketball coaches.
Yeah, just a great year. And it's crazy that probably the most replayed clip from that season is the Luke May shot, not, anything to do with the national title game or anything like that. That's the clip you see from that season. Yeah.
That in the bar somewhere in Kentucky of the elation of the fans. And then that one guy just doing that, which I love it because I love the emotion of college sports. I love the emotion of college basketball. And you get those two fan bases together. I mean, there's nothing better. I've had the honor and privilege to cover Carolina, Kentucky, I think in 10 different arenas. And I've covered regional finals and big games. And it seems like every year at some point, Kentucky people are around wherever I am. I mean, obviously the CBS Sports Classic's one thing, but also elsewhere. And that just made that even more of a magical experience just from a sports perspective.
Yeah, just such a great year, so many storylines, and from a journalistic perspective, it had to be a pretty awesome year to cover. With, like I said, just because the sheer amount of storylines and the redemption arc that came along with it, just one that I think will, obviously, because Carolina won a title, will go down in history as one of the funnest and probably greatest years with all the storylines around it for Carolina basketball. Let's move on to number 4, AJ. What's your fourth on this list?
2012, and I think they would be higher on the list had Kendall Marshall not broken his wrist. And let's remember John Henson had an ankle injury during that period as well. Stillman White had, I think, 11 assists in the Sweet 16 and regional final. But he played really well, but he wasn't Kendall. And they lost to Kansas in the regional final in 2012. That's a club that was on a collision course with Kentucky. I covered the loss at Kentucky that year when I think Henson
Anthony Davis, wasn't it?
Anthony Davis blocked Henson's shot from the right baseline at the end of the game, and Carolina wanted Kentucky again. They wanted them, and they would have ended up playing them because those were two phenomenal teams, and that was taken away because of the injuries do happen. Maybe we'll do a drop on the most devastating injuries from a what could have been perspective, because that would be up there. 1984 is one as well, 1977. But this one was huge because that was a fantastic team. Zeller and Henson were so good up front. Zeller was the ACC Player of the Year. A guy who I think is a little underrated now that we're 11 years later. I don't think he's as appreciated historically as he should be. He was a very, very good player, awesome player. And that was Kendall just kind of rolling. You had Harrison Barnes out there. And then you had Dexter Strickland and you had Reggie Bullock out there on that team. Reggie's still in the NBA. Man, they were good. They went to Duke that year and had a huge lead on Duke. And I'll never forget the shot that Henson had where I swear he had like the scissors or whatever with the legs. And one leg was on that sideline, one leg was on that sideline because he was so long. And that was a fun team as well. That was a mature team again, very, very mature group. Kendall was mature for a second-year player. Harrison arrived mature. And I really enjoyed covering Henson. I really enjoyed covering Tyler Zeller, one of my favorite players I've ever covered at Carolina. And it was cool for them because they were on the 2010 team that struggled and kind of sprung up late in the NIT when Roy moved Henson down to the 4 and just stuck him there. And the rest is history, long career in the NBA as well. So 2012 was what could have been team, but they were awfully good, awfully good.
Yeah, it's this year that sparked the disdain for Creighton for a lot of Carolina fans as well, with how Kendall Marshall did break his wrist. Oh, they can't stand him.
I still hate him.
I love it. I think it's fantastic.
Oh, of course. Hey, hate is a part of sport. Look, hate in regular life, that's different.
Yeah,
hate in sports is a beautiful thing. I'm an Orioles fan. I'm an Orioles fan. They're playing the Yankees this past week, and my wife's like, "Are you okay?" Because like there's some serious disdain going on there, man. And just imagine if they're playing the Red Sox, whom I hate even more than the Yankees. I'm 100%. One of those guys. So hate is great in sports. It fuels the passion, and I'm okay with it.
I love it too, man. It's what makes sports great, in my opinion. But yeah, that team is one of the biggest what if teams for a lot of Carolina fans because of how it went down. Such a fun year to watch Kendall Marshall too. I just loved watching Kendall Marshall back then. He was so different than your typical point guards that you see at Carolina because he was a pass first guy. And just the creativity he played with to get in the lane, it was poetry in motion at times. And just one of my favorite players to watch at Carolina in my lifetime. I thought because he was different in the way he played, and he wasn't the quickest guy in the world. He wasn't the fastest guy in the world, another prettiest jump shot in the world, but the way he could get in the lane, get teammates involved, the way he could pass the ball, and the way he could hit big time shots too. I think that goes under the radar as well. Yeah, it's unfortunate to end it like it did. I can see the picture in my head of Kendall Marshall in the game after the Creighton game with it on his wrist during kind of the shoot around and stuff before that. That picture sticks in my mind because it's just a what if season for the Tar Heels because that was a really, really good team. There's no two ways around that.
By the way, two things. One, Kendall Marshall with the pitch ahead in the break. Unbelievable.
Oh, God, man.
Stillman White was on both the teams we've talked about.
I know. It's crazy, man. It's crazy.
Because he went and did his LDS mission.
And then he came back.
And he played in that Kentucky game that Luke had the big shot. Mm-hmm. Stillman had a reverse layup. He had about 5 really solid, important minutes during that game.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I completely forgot that he went away for a couple of years and then came back to Carolina. He's one of the
Pride of Wilmington.
Yeah, Pride of Wilmington as well. Yeah. Stillwater White is what they used to call him. I thought he had a great nickname.
If you rank all-time UNC basketball players from Wilmington, Stillman White's gonna be right near Michael Jordan.
Yeah, man. He got to be up there close to Jordan, right, man? He got to be up there close to him for sure. All right, AJ, real quickly, we'll move on to 3 in a second. Let me give a shout out to our sponsor on this one. That's Rogue Shop, rogueshop.com. Check them out. Specialized top shelf family grown hemp products, CBD, Delta 8, Delta 9, whatever you're into, whatever form you want to consume any of those kind of products. And they've got you covered. Links in the description below. Make sure you use that promo code Tar Heels 10 to save on your order as well. Big thank you to them for continuing to sponsor us and all the stuff we do, not only on the website, but the YouTube channel as well. Okay, AJ, number 3 on the list. Who is it?
2005 title team.
Yeah, got to throw them in there MOP, somewhere.
Raymond Felton, Rashad McCants, Marvin Williams, Jawad Williams, Jackie Manuel, Melvin Scott, David Noel. That was, again, a really tough team. And a lot of their toughness was developed for the seniors, their first 2 years playing under Matt Doherty, and for the juniors, their first year playing under Matt Doherty. That's a club that the seniors went from 8-20 to a national championship. To me, it's the greatest story in Carolina basketball history. Mm-hmm. When Jackie, and I think I've told you this story. I may have said on one of our drops, or one of our pods, but the first 3 players I talked to in the locker room in 2005 after they beat Illinois were Jawad Williams, Melvin Scott, and Jackie Manuel because they were on the 8-20 team. I talked to them a lot that year and throughout. And the fact that they had that story to tell, to me, it's the greatest story ever. Go from 8-20 as freshmen to national champions as seniors. They all had pivotal roles. Melvin, in the Sweet 16 win over Villanova up in Syracuse, came through, got him the W. Jackie Manuel starting, didn't score in the Final Four, didn't score that weekend in St. Louis, but was huge. And, of course, Jawad was just a really, really solid player, made himself an NBA player, very good career overseas. That was a talented team. That was a street fighting type team. That's a club that if you talk about what Carolina basketball teams would you want with you in a back alley, I think 2005 would be at or near the top of that list. That was a group that could brawl when they had to. That was a group that toughed out whatever they needed to, and they finessed when they could. They had it all. They really did. And I think that some of the edge that they got early on when they arrived in Chapel Hill, I think that helped them. That helped pull them through because they had some tough games, and Illinois was really, really good. Mm-hmm. They were really, Darren Williams was on that team. I remember walking behind him. So there was a long, long walk from the court at the Edward Jones Dome in St. Louis to where the locker rooms were. And I remember walking behind him for a while. He was just walking by himself, essentially. And I'm about maybe 12 paces behind. And his head was down the entire time. Like, I don't even know how he knew where he was walking because his head wasn't up. And it was really just a fascinating thing that you see, in the bowels of arenas. You've been there before. You see a lot of stuff that maybe you don't report at that time, but you tuck away, and 17, 18 years later, you bring it up. Another thing was they have little barriers, like they're partitioned off where media can't stand. It's the alley for the lane for players and staff to get the locker rooms in the postseason, right? So we have to stand right there, right near the locker room door. And I went back there right away. That's one of the reasons why I saw Williams walking in his uniform. I think he was actually going to the bus maybe too, which is pretty wild. But I'm standing there, and like the locker room door is right across from me. It's 12, 15 feet maybe, if even that. And the players come running, and standing there waiting for him is Dean Smith and Michael Jordan. So, like, we're all in that same spot right there. And I'll never forget when Raymond, saw Michael, and he ran up to Michael. And you were right. It was a really, really cool moment. And Raymond was a great guy, man. I love covering Raymond Felton. Such a tough dude. And it was really cool to see that moment because they went through a lot. And they came out and won a title, and it was Roy's first title, and Roy didn't get credit for it, which is kind of weird because I thought the greatest coaching job he ever did was getting Rashad McCants on the same page as everybody else the last couple of months of that season. And he did. They won a title, and everybody moved on. They were happily ever after, except for the crap that Rashad said that everybody else unanimously debunked, and that team was legitimate. The banner should stay up there because your eligibility, just for the sake of discussion, is determined on the semester academically beforehand, not the semester that you're in. So it didn't matter what those guys did in the second semester that year because they all left. So it didn't matter. As long as the first semester that year in the fall, they did their job, then they're eligible for the next semester. You could stop going to class and not go at all and flunk everything. And it doesn't matter. You're still eligible that semester. I only bring that up because some Yahoo's going to go ahead and mouth off about it on Twitter or wherever. So it's Facebook, whatever the case may be.
No, it was a fantastic season. I remember watching I remember when I was younger watching the documentary that Carolina put out from that season. And I remember one instance that stuck in my head was the game in Cameron they lost. And funny enough, AJ, I was just Googling that game because I wanted to figure out, couldn't remember what the scoreline was, 71-70. And the first article that popped up from February 10th, 2005, Wilmington Star News, written by Andrew Jones, reading your story right now. You can still find it on the internet, your takeaways from the game. And I can't remember specifically what happened in the last sequence, but I think Raymond Felton lost the ball or turned it over.
It was a loose ball, yeah.
Ranana wasn't able to get a shot off, essentially, to see if they could win the game.
And J.J. Redick got the loose ball and slid, and there was no travel call. I think it was debatable whether you could call it or not. I think it was one of those deals where the refs made the right call by not calling it and made the wrong call by not calling it. It depends on what shade your lens is, I guess. For me, I think it was just another little moment that added to the facade of that team ultimately.
Yeah.
So
100%.
Yeah.
And the toughness aspect.
That's a game that I believe Peyton Manning was on one baseline, if I'm not mistaken, and Donald Trump was on the other baseline.
What a lineup, man. You can see a lot of celebrities at those games. And I think the reason I brought that game up is because I remember they kind of talked to I think it was Rashad and Raymond. They were interviewing in the documentary, and basically I remember it was either Rashad or Raymond. They kind of said to each other after the game, like, we can't do this. We can't lose to Duke anymore. We can't do it. We're not doing this anymore. And then the way they went into the Smith Center and won a game like that, and the toughness, AJ, that I think Raymond Felton personified. Because in the game, reading your column, right, reading your observations right here, 8 turnovers for Raymond Felton in that game. And I remember how upset he was because he kind of felt responsible. They lost the game. The toughness that he showed in the NCAA tournament to help, he was just so tough, AJ. And I think that game, the quotes from that game, one of my favorite quotes ever were from Roy Williams in that documentary. It's amazing what can be accomplished when no one cares who gets the credit. That quote's always stuck with me when I've heard it. And that team personified from Roy, personified from the toughness that Raymond showed, personified by the guys that stuck around through the Doherty era and ended up winning a national championship. It's just so many storylines from that season. It just seems like anytime Carolina wins a national championship, maybe barring the 2009 team when they were just so good, especially under Roy Williams, just feels like there's always some really cool storylines that go around it. And that 2005 team is no exception, man. No exception.
Yeah, that Roy really quote applies to Rashad McCants. I mean, that's the greatest coaching maneuver Roy ever made was getting McCants on the same page that year, period.
100%. Yeah, no, you're right. You've told me that off camera many a times, and it's something you've stuck by for years now. So no, I think you're absolutely right too. It's just a fascinating team. And if you haven't seen the documentary, guys, I'm sure you can find it somewhere. It's a really, really good documentary. Just kind of talks.
I actually haven't seen it. I actually have not seen it.
It's really good, man. They interview all the players. It was done by Carolina. Interview all the players, interview all the coaches, and they just kind of walk you through the whole season. And it's fascinating. That Duke moment in Cameron always stuck out because it was something that really, they basically made a conscientious decision. We're not losing to Duke again. And they won what they did in the Smith Center, winning with the Marvin Williams, the way they did it, and then going on to win the national championship. Just amazing, man. Really good documentary. Definitely check it out. But yeah, your column's still up on the Wilmington Star News, AJ, your observation. So pretty cool. Still sticking around.
People should look up, speaking of 2009, which we're going to get to the next two Hansbrough years. Look up my piece I also wrote about Tyler baking cupcakes and cookies with his girlfriend back then.
I'll have to go find that.
You Google it, and it's still there. It'll come.
I need to go find that. one, man.
It's fun stuff.
Yeah, so, no doubt about it.
Yeah, when I asked him about it, and he was just sort of didn't want to answer it first because Bobby Frazier and Marcus Ginyard told me about it.
Oh, that's great.
I told him, I said, I'm looking to write a story about Tyler that just hadn't been written yet. And Bobby's great. Bobby would just feed you everything.
Oh, they had the bromance. Him and Bobby were tight.
And Marcus. They had Marcus that crazy they all lived too. Together. Yeah. They had the greatest house. Mm-hmm. Like not talking the actual structure, just the environment. Just that, yeah. House. I mean, just fun. And I asked Bobby, go ask Marcus. He'll tell you. So I asked Marcus, and then I go to Tyler with all this ammunition, right? Ammunition. And I said, well, I asked him about baking cupcakes with his girlfriend and cookies and things like that, brownies. And he didn't want to go there. And finally I said, all right, I go over to her place and every once in a while, a couple of cupcakes or cookies pop out of the oven. And he's like moving his head back and forth talking. And then it ended up being really good stuff. He was a good sport about it. And it came up again in the NCAA tournament, I think in 2009. Was it 2009? Yeah, I think it was 2009. No, 2009 was Memphis in the Sweet 16 region. It was the breakout interviews the day before the regional final when they beat Oklahoma. And I kind of mentioned I said, hey, you still baking cupcakes with your girls? Come on, man. And then some national media was there. And I think that they may have asked him about it and wrote something about it as well.
That's good, man. Perfectly
great.
Fits Hansbrough too. It's just we'll obviously talk about him a little bit more in a second because I don't know if I know what your number two is. I don't know what your number one is. So what is your number two, AJ?
Well, number two is 2008.
Okay,
a team that lost to Kansas in the Final Four. They were awesome, awesome.
It's a really good team. Another what-if team, yeah.
Yeah, well, 40-12, they just got beat, man.
Yeah,
they got their butts kicked, but then they roared back. They got routed twice in that game. 40-12, and then they cut it within a couple points, and then Kansas pulls away. But I'm not going to let that sour how good that team was. I mean, that team was just phenomenal. They were better than 17. I think they were better than 05. They just didn't win a title. And Kansas did. Kansas was really good. They beat a really good Memphis team. I covered that title game as well. The Chalmers bucket. It was a phenomenal game. I mean, I thought there were four worthy national champions in that Final Four. UCLA was there. I think that was a Kevin Love team. So that was a great Final Four. And Carolina just didn't play well early against Kansas. And that was it. But that doesn't take away from the season. They were just so good. And again, the history of redemption for national titles at North Carolina is strong. It isn't just 2017. That club was fueled by 40-12 the next year. They were fueled by it. And they put their foots on the throats of just about everybody the next year. And so much that came from 2008, because I think part of what they learned was you could be great in the regular season. You could be the best team in college basketball, but you got to keep applying pressure as you get into the postseason. And they did that the following year. But '08 was a wonderful team. You saw Ty Lawson really take a giant step forward in his maturation, in his game management at the point. And we'll talk about '09 here in a second. It's pretty obvious what number one is. And you saw Wayne Ellington's game grow. As freshman, Ellington was a catch and shoot, one dribble jump shooter. You saw more of his game in '08. I think '08 may have been the year he hit the game winner at Clemson as well.
It was. Yeah.
Yeah. And you saw Tyler was National Player of the Year in '08. You saw Deion Thompson's game start to grow in 2008. Danny Green, Marcus Ginyard. Now he started on the '08 team. He did in '09 because he got injured and was redshirted. So Danny stepped into the starting role. But Marcus was really solid. Danny was the best six man in college basketball. And look at what he's done since. Yeah. Still playing, still making a crap load of money. So that was a phenomenal team. And it's to me, it's hard to talk about that team without talking about 2009 because the connectivity of those two clubs is significant. And so you can ask me what number one is, and I'll give you my answer here if you want, because I think you know who it is.
Yeah, I think everybody. Probably the worst kept secret because that '09 team was so good. But yeah, even on the '08, real quick, 36-3. Imagine being 36-3 in today's world and not win a national title. I think that speaks to how good that team was. Give me your number one. The whole world knows what it is, but
it's 2009, obviously, and I love the connectivity. What was their final record?
2009 was 34-4.
34-4. Yeah, they had a little hiccup there in January.
Yeah, January lost to Boston College, then they beat Charleston, lost to Wake Forest, so they did lose 2 out of 3 early in January, but they, obviously bounced back after that.
Yeah, they lost in the ACC tournament because Ty was out.
Florida State, yep.
He was injured. Bobby Frazier started, and Ty didn't play in the first game of the NCAA tournament when Tyler became the ACC all-time leading scorer, I think, with a bucket or a free throw against Radford.
Yeah, Radford, past Reddick.
Seth Greenberg's brother was the Radford coach. I remember seeing Seth sitting behind the bench just with all kinds of venom, anti-Carolina venom. I got some Seth stories.
I've heard a few.
But yeah, nothing bad. Very competitive guy. And then Ty came back. They were struggling a little bit with LSU in the second round, and then just Ty got him going. And his ankle was a story. Joel's ankle in 2017 was a story. Ty's ankle in 2009 was a story. And that club won every NCAA tournament game by double figures. UConn, the first team since then to do that this past year. I think this Carolina club would wipe the floor with that UConn team. Yeah. I think they'd wipe the floor with all the champions since then. I think that's the last great college basketball team. Kentucky would have been had they would have finished the deal in 2015.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've had a great college national champion since. I think Kentucky 2012 was close.
Mm-hmm.
But 2009 Carolina, I think you put them up against all national champions since then. I think that club is a significant favorite in every one of those games. And I think the thing that impressed me the most about that team, and this is another reason why I hold Tyler in such high esteem, and he is the greatest Carolina basketball player of all time as a Tar Heel, as a college player, is that Ty Lawson passed him by that year because his game was just skyrocketing. And he had that game winner. He had that game winner at Florida State. Ty ended up being ACC Player of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
And Tyler wanted to win so badly that there was no ego there with him, that he let it happen. Stepped aside. Ty, I mean, this is your team too. It's all over. I mean, they were all leaders. All of them were leaders. They had amazing leadership, but he had to step aside to let Ty's game to continue to grow, continue to flourish. And it did. Ellington was the MOP. Lawson had 8 steals in the national championship game.
And it wasn't even a game. They blew him out. I mean, it was not a game. It was just a blowout.
In Detroit. I remember that was during a period where the state of Michigan was having a lot of financial issues, economic issues rather.
Mm-hmm.
And the storyline was, can you guys win this one for the state of Michigan? Which I kind of thought, well, winning a basketball championship would be great. It's not going to change people's lives or anything like that. And that was the storyline. And here the Tar Heels were, and they were asked every once in a while about 40-12.
Mm-hmm.
And they had 20 coats of armor on
Oh, man.
They had laser focus, and they just went in there and kicked the snot out of everybody. And the thing is, they beat Michigan State at Ford Field twice that year.
Mm-hmm.
They beat them earlier in the year
Yep.
in the ACC Big Ten Challenge and beat the ever-loving crap out of them, and then did it again in the championship game in a building that had 74,000 people in there. And I'd be willing to bet you that maybe 60,000 were Michigan State fans. They beat Illinois in 2005 in St. Louis, and St. Louis is right on the Mississippi River, right across the river is Illinois. There were 47,000 people in the Dome for that game, and I bet 40,000 were Illinois fans.
That was a really good Illinois team.
09. 09 was when they changed the seating for the Final Four. They put the court in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, and since then they've had like 70+ thousand for every game. That was the first game like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty wild. And I'll never forget the great Tucker McLaughlin. He sat next to me on press row for the championship game, or the Final Four, I guess it was. And right when the opening tip was getting ready to happen for Carolina's game, he turned to me and said, "No, we work hard, but this is the reward."
Oh, that's great, man. Rest in peace, Tucker, man. Yeah, awesome. Just the one-liners he dropped throughout his life, just amazing, man. Again, I've told you we could do a 2-hour podcast on stories about him, but man, just a great guy a great way to kind of wrap the 09 team up in terms of discussing them too, because such a fun team. I'll ask you this real quick, putting you on the spot a little bit, but is in your opinion, is that the greatest Carolina team of all time? It's got to be up there. I mean, I know recency bias plays a factor in it, I'm sure, but it's just hard to compete with that team, and they were absolutely loaded.
Yeah, 57 was undefeated. They won the Final Four and title game in triple overtime both, and they beat Wilt Chamberlain in the title game.
That's pretty impressive to you.
You have to. You can't say in that conversation. You can't say, well, 82 and 09 would beat them, because they would, I'm sure.
Different time, yeah.
But they still deserve their place. The 82 team and the 09 team would be a great game.
Wouldn't it, though?
I think 98 would, too. Yeah. 98 didn't win a title. They fell short. They had that stupid 6-man starting rotation by Guthridge. But that was a really, 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 really good club, too. That was one of the best ever at Carolina. Arguably the best team at Carolina to never win a title. 84 was one of them, too.
2012 kind of in that mix, too.
2012, yeah, I guess we'll do a pod. The best Carolina teams not win titles.
Yeah, that'll
77. Dean went to the four corners, maybe a little bit too early. One could say 84 to Kenny Smith injury. 87 was damn good. They went undefeated in the ACC. 98, 2012. Those are great ones that didn't win titles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just 09 team for me was in my lifetime greatest team I've ever watched. And it just absolutely loaded. And you look at that roster now, and it almost doesn't feel like a college team. Maybe because a lot of those players had such long NBA careers, or a guy like Hansbrough's arguably the greatest Carolina player in the history. It's just such a mature team, and a team that had so many leaders like you mentioned on it. And I'll never forget watching that national title game, and I've never been that, relaxed watching any game. It wasn't a game. It was just a blowout. I mean, it was never really a game. Amazing.
It was highly impressive. And by the way, I didn't answer your question, because maybe we'll do a drop on that. So
yeah, I like that. We should. I
can leave the what do they call that? A cliffhanger?
Yeah, a little cliffhanger. We'll leave people on a little cliffhanger right there, because I do think that'd be a fascinating daily drop. And I do want to do that in the future. So I won't let you speak on that anymore, because we'll do a drop about that at some point this off season. We'll go ahead and get out of here, AJ. This is a little bit longer of a one, because there's so much to discuss. Could probably go another 30 minutes talking about these teams, especially since you got to cover them. But if you agree with us, let us know. Get involved on our Twitter. You can reach out to us at Heel Illustrated, Facebook at Tar Heel Illustrated, or whatever way you want to get in contact with us, you can do it that way. Even on our premium message boards, we post every single content item as a thread. Get involved in the thread if you're signed up. If you're not, links in the description below. Sign up for just $8.33 a month. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Another edition of our daily drop series. Go ahead and like this video if you're enjoying this series. We appreciate y'all watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.